Hey gang, welcome back to Reanimated, another blast from the past for you today as HA and Stuart, the regular hosts of Reanimated, are out and about gallivanting and doing holiday things. This week we've got the Encore presentation of Reanimated's episode about dead snow, reaching way back to episode 20 when it was just really pretty much the same thing that's going on now, just even longer ago, like 2013, I want to say, 2014. Either way, hope you enjoy it and listen on. HA and I today are going to be reviewing the 2009. I think it's not too soon to say that it's a classic.
No, it's definitely a classic. It's got its own little following, most certainly.
The film Dead Snow, directed by Tommy Wirkola. We're going to butcher a bunch of Norwegian names because neither HA or I really realized that we were reviewing a Norwegian film today. I kind of assumed that it was set in Europe or in Northern Europe, and then I just, for whatever reason, thought that it was going to be in English. But I was super happy that it was subtitled and not dubbed.
Myself as well. And for some reason, I knew it was a foreign film and a foreign director, but just didn't realize that it was in another language. But that was okay too. It actually added to it, in my opinion. But this movie was made on a budget of $800,000, which is pretty impressive given how it looks. I thought it was filmed very well. But it's a pretty decent sized cast as well.
Especially when you count all those Nazi zombies.
Indeed. Do you want to kick off the opening, Stuart?
The opening, right. So this film begins with a nighttime in the snow chase, basically. I was wondering when I was watching this if it was kind of shot like...
In the daytime?
Old films, they used to shoot night scenes in the daytime and then just make it really dark in post-processing.
I think that's definitely what they did here, but it was still very pretty.
It could have been just a full moon in Norway in the snow, like, because that will make a lot of reflective light. It's just, I think it's hard to tell because you've seen it done the other way so many times, and now I feel like you look at this and you're like, is that for real? If they don't show the moon or the sky in the shot, I think it gets harder to tell. But then if they pan away from the snow, you lose a lot of that reflected light too. So it's basically a scene of a lot of silhouettes. And
but it's got the whole creepy music in the background. It's the Hall of the Mountain King, I think.
Oh yeah, it's Grieg. Yeah, that's a great use of that because I only associate that with Fantasia.
Right. And so we got the skier, and she's just kind of, I mean, you get the sense that she's, skiing for her life or something. She's definitely terrified. She's making her way over the mountains in the snow. And it's hard to tell whether she was out there for survival reasons or not at first. And then you kind of see that she's being chased by something.
Yes, a group of somethings. And at one point, the film quickly lets us know that it's not afraid of the cheap scares when she stops to catch her breath and it looks like there's nothing behind her. And then his head pops up right in front of the camera, and you're just like, "Oh, okay." It's one of those movies.
Yes, they don't hold back. They do every single possible thing that they could do on this.
It's an example of a film that is quite self-conscious about coming to the party a little late in terms of horror, and then playing to a lot of those self-conscious tropes.
And at first, you think she's going to get away because she is making some pretty good time, and then alas, she hit her head first, or she falls first and then hits
falls
her head?
And hits something, and then she's like, "Ow!" And then a bunch of dudes jump on her and start tearing into her.
Yep, and then she's done. Then it flips immediately to a driving scene, and we are introduced to our cast, basically the rest of the cast.
The gang, the seven members of this little travel group.
Right, the medical students. So I don't know. Do you want to take a hack at the names? Because I'll do it if you don't want to.
I will read them off of a list. We got Vegard, Martin, Erland, Roy, Sarah, Hannah, Chris, and Leave. The first four there are dudes. The last four are ladies. So Chris is a lady. I think that's the only one that'll get confusing later.
Right.
And they're separated by gender in the first, and we've got the dudes are talking about which single chicks are coming on the trip, and about how to dig your way out of a avalanche, which actually didn't really come in handy later. I mean, it kind of did.
I thought it would be more important, but in any case, and we are also introduced to Vegard's very sweet headband, which does not leave his head for a very large part of this movie.
No, he's in the
and then the other car is the ladies, and they are talking also about which men are single, which are taken, and just what sex animals they are, or how nerdy they are. But this is supposed to be Easter weekend, apparently, and the cabin that they're going to is their friend Sarah's, who has been trying to ski over the mountain. Aha.
Yes, and so they're like, "Oh, what time is Sarah gonna get there?" And they're like, "Maybe tonight or tomorrow. She's so badass." So right away we're like, "Oh, yeah, maybe that was her who died last night." They arrive at the dismount point in their two Volkswagens, whatever it is they're driving, and Vegard goes ahead on his snowmobile. Thank you.
Right.
And his
which
snowmobile.
he loves very much. Did you notice how much love and attention he gave to?
He's petting it and stroking it, and then he does all these wicked jumps on it.
Right. But one thing that and this is just a minor point, but he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to go to the cabin and get it all set up, and the luggage, you take all your luggage," but then they're all still carrying luggage. Somebody's bringing a wheelie suitcase, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense at all. But that is just a small point.
Yeah, that would suck. But this is also where when they're walking up, Erland, who's the tubby blonde guy, he's like, "Oh, hey, how many movies start out with a group of kids going to a cabin?" And they're like, Evil Dead 2. And I guess that is basically they're just saying exactly which movie they based this one off of. Or not exactly, but it's definitely an Evil Dead type film more than, say, a typical zombie film.
Oh, definitely. It's definitely the cabin in the woods, remote location, couples out thinking they're having a fun time, and really they're just going to bite it. And, I saw, Cabin in the Woods did this too, and it was called Cabin in the Woods for this specific trope. So, so you kind of know what you're in for. And by the way, this is billed as a horror comedy.
Yeah.
So they basically are not being shy about laying out exactly what the audience is going to say.
Although, honestly, as a comedy, I think there's a couple of really funny moments, but it's not a comedy.
It's not a comedy. I would say it's a horror film with a couple of comic moments. It is, to me, it is definitely not a Shaun of the Dead type film.
No.
So, but maybe we're not getting it because we're not Norwegian, Stuart.
Maybe there's maybe there's some lost in translation going on there. But for the most part, it's pretty serious. There's the typical good times that are had before all the shit hits the fan. And maybe we're supposed to be laughing the whole time we're watching that,
I don't know about you, Stuart, but I really enjoy going tubing and eating hot dogs. It's awesome.
Yeah. Exactly.
And listening to Norwegian punk rock.
Or speed metal or whatever. Yeah.
Whatever it is.
So that's basically what happens when they get to the top of the mountain. They go tubing, and we find out that some of them are already a couple. Are Vegard and Sarah a couple?
Yes.
I think they are.
Yeah, they are, because he keeps saying his girlfriend's cabin. So yes, okay. I believe that they are definitely a couple.
We got Martin and Hannah, Hannah of the dreadlocks are a couple, and she refers to him as being the hottest one there in the cars when they're on their way there. And he's actually
kind of interesting.
He's just nerdy looking.
Super nerdy looking. Also has a total fear of blood, which they mentioned about 10 times before they even get to the cabin.
Yeah.
And then
who else is Roy is a single dude who has no prospects because he's too horny.
Apparently.
And Erland, blonde tubby guy, is single and apparently completely irresistible to Chris, who is way out of his league.
Totally out of his league. And he, like, they bill him as being such a movie nerd into movies, and she tries to bond with him about this a couple of times. But yes, this coupling does not make sense to me.
But, more power to him.
Right. And then there's Leave, who is just on her own, right?
Yeah, she looks like, seriously, like a member of ABBA.
She totally does.
And she, I think, is most notable for her fearful expressions. I'm going to throw that out there.
I would agree with you there.
So they're having a good time. The night falls, and a knock. Wait, no, there's not a knock on the door, but Leave, the blonde, is out in the outhouse and sees somebody running around, like being really furtive and weird just outside the light from the windows of the cabin.
Let me just pause here and talk about this outhouse. First of all, I don't know. Like, the outhouse in the middle of the woods just never seems like a good idea to me. Just saying. I know they're in a pretty remote area, but come on.
For what reasons?
Well, especially, like, it's so remote. There's probably, like, wild animals out there. It's freezing cold. You got to go out there. I mean, we're talking about a very cold climate. Maybe they're just used to it because they're Norwegian. But just totally weird. Even when she went out into the outhouse, I was like, even in normal circumstances, just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But I do digress now.
While I've never been to a Norwegian cabin, I've been to a Swiss one, and there was one toilet, but it didn't work in the winter because everything would be frozen. So we would actually just go out and shit in the woods, like dig out a snowy area. But the snow is really whatever. Probably too much information, but this is like you're just like, okay, this is now the shit area, and so we dig a giant path to get there, and then then you're on your own. So I'm gonna say that the outhouse is actually quite nice compared to out in the open air.
I guess. Still. Anyway, Leave is out there and she sees something. And admittedly, if I was out there in the middle of the night, and they're all kind of drunk as well, by the way. So she's a little bit tipsy and she sees something, and it's definitely a human something. And she goes back to tell everybody, and they all kind of make fun of her.
Yeah. And this doesn't make a huge amount of sense. It's good for building tension because this person or thing is acting like it's spying on them and then running around out beyond the light. And then there's a knock on the door, and it's old guy.
Right. The Wanderer, I think, is what they bill him as. And, he really reminded me of, in Jaws, the crazy drunken fisherman.
I can't say I am that familiar. No.
So basically, you've got in Jaws, they have everybody, is trying to figure out what's going on, and then everybody's kind of upset. It's a big mystery. They're all in the dark, and then Quint, the shark fisherman, comes in and tells everybody sort of the background and how he's gonna help them get rid of the shark. So in this case, this crazy old guy shows up, and he's super weird. I don't know that I would be inviting this guy into my house. Would you?
I think this is cultural. It has to be. Like, for whatever reason, you don't turn people away from your cabin when they're like, give me some coffee. This coffee's terrible. Give me a beer. Let me smoke. You guys suck. I'm out of here. Like, that's kind of how it goes.
It totally is. And he shows up, and he's kind of yelling at them for even being in the cabin. He's upset to hear that Sarah's skiing over the mountains, and then tells them this really super disturbing story about the area, which is the basis for this whole film. And apparently this area had been taken over by the Nazis during the Second World War, and they were awful to the townspeople. They tortured them horribly. And in the end, they tried to take all their valuables. Like, they would go house to house, and at that point, apparently not when they were being tortured, but when their valuables were on the line, the townspeople stood up and revolted and went after this whole legion of Nazis, which were led by Oberst
Herzog.
So Oberst basically said, or didn't say anything. He just was like, I'm not going to get my head bashed in by the villagers, and took his legion of Nazis into the hills. And so apparently there's evil in the hills that the Wanderer says should not be bothered with, or he kept saying, tread lightly. We don't want to wake it up, or something like that.
Yeah.
Bears,
by the way, is just his rank. It's not his first.
Oh, is that? I thought it was his first name. Apologies. My bad. So Herzog is somewhere, never came back, somewhere out there in the woods. And on that happy note, the Wanderer just takes off. It doesn't really give them any other information other than that, right?
Yeah, he does kind of choke Roy out a little bit. Oh, also another point that we should remember is that in the car ride, it is divulged that Vegard and Roy are both have both done some military time. In Europe, in certain countries, it's more common to do a little bit of military, before college or something like that. So they've both got a little bit of experience. Although Roy admitted that he didn't remember very much from his time. So when I was looking at the old guy choking Roy out, I'm just like, Roy, you're not really representing us well.
Yeah, no, he was totally just hanging out there. I forgot about the choking part. Yeah. So,
because honestly, the old dude does not present his information well enough. He's just kind of like, look out for evil, because 50 years ago some bad shit happened here. 60, and then they're all just kind of like, yeah, okay, buddy. We appreciate you coming into this cabin, insulting us, telling us to look out for evil, and then so they kind of laugh at him, and which is why he gets super pissed and calls them spoiled brats, and then leaves in a sulk. He didn't present very well, and then he doesn't really perform very well 5 minutes later when we see him in his tent.
Right. And he's just, for somebody who's supposedly aware of all the evil, he wasn't exactly on guard. Wouldn't you agree?
I guess not. Well, I mean, how on guard can you be in a tent in a snowstorm at night? But he does have a gun, and he has a flashlight. I think he's a dude who's used to being able to handle his stuff, and he doesn't know, I guess, what form the evil is going to take necessarily. He just knows there's some bad juju up there.
And I have to say, this is part of the film that I was so about. I felt like they needed to build up this story a little bit more, but they didn't. So, in any case, he gets taken out in pretty short order by a Nazi zombie. Yeah. And it's a pretty dirty ending too.
Yeah. A lot of the outside the tent looking with a light inside of it, some of that good silhouette and blood stuff. The blood in this movie should have its own credit. It should have its own credit.
It is pretty impressive, actually.
$800,000 is probably like $400,000 worth of fake blood.
And then, back at the ranch, we have the kids in the house again. And they're all just kind of doing their thing. And I think we didn't mention this, but there's this weird scene where, I guess it's character building, but you're kind of seeing stuff going on within the different couples. And there's this really strange little side scene where Martin says something to Hannah like, oh, let me show you this medieval anesthetic technique. And then he does this creepy thing where he pins her down and almost suffocates her with a pillow, which I thought was really creepy.
Yeah. There's no funny side to it, and I think he feels pretty bad about it because everybody's like, "What the fuck is the matter with you?" And right. Hannah hits him with a spoon on his head multiple times, which is probably really painful.
Right. And then on to the next little plot point is that Erland goes. Where's he going? He went down into the little crawl space to get something. Was it more beer or something like that?
Yeah, that's the ice chest basically.
And comes upon this wooden box that he pulls up out of the little space, and turns out it's full of gold coins and other goods. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah,
that it's there at all.
They've completely forgotten the story, so they're just like, "Oh, look at all this gold."
And then they're like, "Oh, let's wait for Sarah," and then they don't do that, and they obviously are getting drunk. And
you've actually jumped a little bit, like we've missed a day because Vergard isn't there anymore, basically. When they find the box.
Oh, okay. I thought he was still there, but perhaps you're correct.
He basically leaves the next day
Because
because
the
Sarah
story,
hasn't
this
shown up.
and the story creeped him out sufficiently, I think, that he
Yeah.
was worried. Plus, he had some weird little night terror where he thought he saw her walking around the house.
Yeah, he sees
And
her walking around the house and blood coming out of her mouth and digging through that hatch in the floor where they keep the beer and where we know the boxes down there too. But so he's like, I'm out of here. And actually, the scene where he wakes up out of bed, he's wearing what long john
headband,
pants and his and
headband.
his knitted headband. And it's a pretty cool look. I'm not gonna lie.
No, it is a cool look. It makes me. It that headband is probably one of my favorite pieces of this film. But yeah, he goes off on his own, and it's actually I kind of enjoy his little journey because it's like he goes off on his snowmobile, then he stops to have a sandwich and tea, and he's just having a little outing out there.
Yeah.
Um, and then you're correct. Then they do find the gold. So
And he also finds the corpse of the wandering guy pretty quickly. But
mhm.
instead of, I don't know, calling the cops at that point immediately, he's even more worried about Sarah, so he keeps going looking for her. I would
Right.
think, like, if you're gonna nitpick this film, you could argue that he should have gone right down the hill and gotten the cops right away.
Right, but I could also see if there was somebody that you cared about up there. If you're like sufficiently freaked out, you're still going to look for them. Plus, he's had military training in Stewart, so maybe he feels like he could handle it.
You're now in a situation where you could call the cops and they could bring up search parties and
True.
do a much better job than one guy on a snowmobile. I would, despite his training, which apparently is really good, because this guy is kind of the only badass, or
He
he
is.
he is the biggest badass in the film.
Yes. Um, yeah. And then so they're while he is doing all this stuff, back at the ranch, they are looking through the gold, and they do weird stuff with it. Like if you found something in somebody's house, like I don't know, I wouldn't be pocketing it, and they're all like putting coins in people's coats, and everybody's being a little weird and greedy, which is kind of odd.
Well,
Um,
this is horror movie stuff. Like, yeah, if you show greed, you're gonna get killed.
right back to Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
Same thing there. They're still having a good time. They're not really worrying that much. They're still getting drunk. And things with, Ireland and Chris really heat up in a way that I'm truly uncomfortable about.
Because of your discomfort with this, I want you to talk about it.
So Ireland, who's the chubby dude, basically says he has to take a big shit and goes out to the outhouse. And at this moment in time, not too long after, Chris basically says, "Okay, I have to go too," or whatever, and makes like excuses to go out and seduce him in the outhouse. And he wasn't making it up. He really was taking a big shit in the outhouse. And she follows him in there and like has sex with him, and it was the most disgusting thing because that's like all I could think about is the fact that he would just taken this huge shit in there. Um, it was truly ick. It really made me super uncomfortable to watch this scene.
I thought it was magical.
You did not. But then, he's done with her. He's done all of his business on many levels and then takes off back to the cabin.
Yeah, that's the nice part of this. Like post-coital, Erilyn is just like, "All right, I'm done," and
I know.
goes back inside and leaves her to take care of. Now I guess she actually had to take shit too, maybe. And
Maybe,
so
maybe.
she's still chilling out there, and
Yeah.
then Nazi
Think,
zombie.
yes, Nazi zombie. She does not have a good ending at all.
Yeah,
Um,
it's pretty bad. Somehow Nazi zombie gets inside the outhouse and pulls her down into the poop reservoir, and you think maybe that's the end of her, but
no,
no.
but then she somehow comes back up, and she's got like a pretty big wound in her like in her belly. And she's just kind of
Covered in
screaming,
shit.
and she's just kind of screaming, but nobody can hear her because of the crappy death metal they have playing. And Ireland's just kind of like, she's fine.
And now Hannah becomes like the worrier, goes. She opens the door, calls out her name, and she's like, she didn't answer. She's not out there. Nobody seems that worried, especially Erland, who should have some sort of attachment to this woman at this point.
Oh, maybe not. Maybe
He's
it
still
was
within
just
10 minutes of sealing the deal, and he's just already like, whatever, she's just playing games.
right.
And Hannah's looking out a window in the kitchen, and she sees Chris's head
Yes.
comes up to the window. She's like, "Oh, thank God!" And then whoever's holding the head like lifts it up out of sight. So, but you do get to see that she's been decapitated. I thought that was actually pretty cool. That was well done.
That was well done. And then all hell breaks loose in the cabin because now they're like, wow, something creepy is going on outside. And
They find a shotgun, and then they got knives. And then they realize that, zombies are trying to come through the windows and through the door, and they're hacking arms and hands off. And Erland, our resident, inside knowledge guy, is like, "Don't get bitten. Whatever happens, don't get bitten." And then,
and of course,
and then he gets, he's standing too close to a window, of course,
and he gets pulled out, and his head gets just pulled apart. Which is a pretty awesome effect, even though it was terrible. It was still pretty good.
I thought it was like when you see the bits of his brain on the floor.
Yeah,
that was nasty.
That's good.
So he meets his end, and then I think we cut back to Vergard. We leave them in this terrible situation.
I know.
The remaining there's 4 of them in there now.
Yep.
And we head back to Vergard, who's still out there on a snowmobile. I think actually by this point he's fallen through the ice into a snow cavern.
Right. And he doesn't know exactly where he is, but obviously he's not going to get back out because he fell pretty far. So he starts wandering around, and there's several tunnels, but there's now a light in them, right?
He gets out pretty quickly, though. I mean, because he's wandering around and he sees some light coming through the ceiling.
Right.
It breaks out of the tunnel, and then immediately goes to his snowmobile, makes a torch using the gasoline from the gas tank, and goes back in to the tunnel.
Because he wants to explore. Why would you do this? I don't know. But
maybe Sarah's down there,
I guess. Well, she is actually down there, and he finds her.
Part of her.
Part of her head.
So this is apparently where the Nazi zombies have been hanging out, are these snow caves.
Right.
And so he finds some guns and a German, a Nazi flag, and Sarah's head, and a bunch of helmets. And then, of course, he also finds some Nazi zombies down there.
Right. And this is not good because he's all on his own, but he manages to get out into the open. And, he's impressive. He's definitely impressive here. They are fast zombies. They're also very strong. They have knives.
And they have a terrible habit of popping up behind you or through the snow.
Right. That's one of the best pieces of this, is that is just an interesting element. But so he thinks he's okay because he gets rid of the sort of guard zombie from the tunnels, or he thinks he does. And then one other one pops up from the snow, and he's like, oh, great. And kind of takes this one out or incapacitates it by first throwing a knife in its eye and then having a tree eviscerate it.
Yeah, it's one of many of these
Right.
evisceration via tree things.
They have a thing about the trees, most certainly in this film. But then his other friend comes back to life, and Vergard is just not going to give up. And he ends up saving himself because he's rolled off a cliff by holding the intestines of the eviscerated zombie.
And there's another zombie that's holding onto him, who climbs up
Right.
him and then takes a big chunk out of his neck.
But he's still not going to go down.
This scene is nuts. It's kind of over the top. It's completely over the top.
Of course it is.
He climbs back up the guts after somehow getting the zombie off of him and kicking him off the cliff, and then goes to his snowmobile and finds his trusty fishing hook and some wire and sews up his neck in a scene that really was way too long for as
It was-
disgusting as it was.
It was too long. It was super disgusting. And then I like how he finishes it off by like putting duct tape around his neck. Like that was awesome. And then he's like, I guess I better get back to the cabin, right?
Yeah, he's like, I guess my work is done here. Better go. Oh, wait, first he puts a MG42 on the front of his snowmobile, a machine gun, and drives off. And then they throw in another zombie, kind of like a little. We didn't really need this one, but a zombie comes out of the snow again, climbs onto the back of his snowmobile, and then gets hit by a low-hanging branch. It's like, okay, there's your comedy, I guess. That's your comedy.
But so there was stuff like that was thrown in that just was unnecessary. Maybe it was supposed to be all super over the top, but it just felt weird. I also felt like that piece was like, what?
Because then you're like Keystone Cop zombies, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And that's really not the tone of this film at all. I mean, they're Nazi zombies.
Can't mix up your 1930s police with Nazis. No, not cool. But okay, so yeah, we leave him and go back to the cabin where our 4 survivors are not doing very well. They're all freaking out.
Yeah,
and they come up with a terrible plan.
It's a pretty terrible plan.
Where they're gonna split up, and as soon as you say that in a horror film,
never a good thing.
I mean, Erland would have said, "No, of course you can't split up. Haven't you seen every movie ever?" But he stood so close to the window. So they decide that 2 of them will run back to the cars and get help, and 2 of the other ones will distract and lure the zombies somewhere to the fjord, perhaps.
Right.
So then it breaks down. So Hannah and Liv, the 2 remaining girls, are going to run back to the cars, and Roy and Martin are going to distract the zombies. And this duo of Martin and Roy, I think, is where a lot of the remaining humor in the film
it's true
basically comes from, because the girls are in dire straits. There's nothing funny going on with them. They're going to die.
No, they're totally going to die. And they're running down. Things are really bad, and I would say Liv is definitely taking the crazy train. Like, she's so panicked and pulling a lot of her crazy faces at this point.
Yep.
And panics even more when Hannah is suggesting that they split up.
Right, because they start getting chased by zombies.
Right. And I will say, Liv does have a point here, which is like, look, we have no chance at all if that happens. But in the end, it still didn't matter. And
funny, it's weird. Like, they're having this way too long conversation about how they should not split up, and of course during and then during this conversation, the zombies catch up to them, right. And then the next scene that we see them, they are not together.
Right, they are totally split up, and Liv, her end is pretty rough.
Yeah, messed up.
Not good. It's filmed like you're looking through her eyes and she's just seeing her intestines in front of her, and you realize it's actually because the Nazis are eating her intestines and she's watching them eat her alive. And she does what I think is probably the only thing she can do at this point, and she pulls a grenade off of one of their belts and just takes them all out with her. Because who wants to sit through that?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a good move.
It was. And Tana, in the meantime, sees the explosion but doesn't know what's happened and just continues running. None of them also... This is another thing that kind of pissed me off. When they came up with this plan, none of them know how to get back to the cars, because Vergard was the one who knew the way, or Vegard. And even though they all walked up there maybe a day, maybe 2 days before, they don't remember how to get back. There were still tracks, supposedly, but maybe it snowed. It was hard to tell.
It had been snowing, but still, like, how... It was a 45-minute walk.
Right.
That's like 3 miles. In the snow, it's actually less. That's less than 3 miles in the snow, because it takes that long to go. Your pace slows down. Didn't they say 45 minutes at the beginning of the film?
Yes.
So it's really not very far at all to the cars, and they can't remember how to get back. And so they've been running in random directions, not really knowing where they're going, trying to just go generally downhill. And then Hannah ends up getting chased by a couple more zombies. We finally see Oberst Herzog for the first time, and he's using binoculars. He's a very advanced zombie. He has lots of zombie soldiers with him still, at least like 12 or something. And he like sends them off after Hannah. And she climbs a tree. And here we come to a scene where the $800,000 and maybe some shortcuts in their special effects budget definitely come through, because she climbs this tree and the zombies can't see her. They go right past her. But then calamity strikes when she sees a bird's nest in front of her. Do you remember this scene?
Yes, but go for it.
Okay, so she sees this bird's nest with some eggs in it. It's a tiny, tiny, tiny little bird's nest, obviously a prop. And and it's also the middle of winter. Like, there are no eggs in nests. Whatever. Okay, moving on.
And, see, I like how this is the scene that bothered you the most, and the other one was it shows our different priorities. Go for it.
And then you start to hear a bird making noises off camera, and she starts shushing it off. Like, she's looking off to her right and like shushing a bird that is squawking off camera. Like, we're supposed to now think that the bird has come back to its nest and is trying to get, and she's like, no, and she starts to struggle with a bird, and then you see like a feathery wing come from off camera and like starts slapping her in the face. And she's like, and eventually she grabs like this fake crow and
whatever it is,
its head against the tree, and then looks down, and the two zombies are there staring at her. But I just thought, best fake bird fight of the
ever. I kind of thought that they were being deliberately cheesy with this. Like, it was such a ridiculous thing that it felt like maybe this was part of the comedy, because that's what I thought it was. But I mean, it was pretty bad. And then Hannah, she's really just not having a good day overall.
No, she can't win for sure. Like, not only do they see her in the tree, and then she runs up to a cliff and basically makes the ice or the snow crack and falls off the cliff with this other zombie who had chased her. And then we think she's dead, basically, and we go back to the what we think are the final three: Vergard, Martin. Although Vergard doesn't really show up for a while. It's basically Martin and Roy doing some crazy
stuff.
Crazy stuff. Like, they're back inside, I think, the cabin.
They're back inside the cabin, and then they
making Molotov cocktails.
Yeah, so their idea, I don't know what they think they're going to do with these. Maybe just throw them at them. But they are not very successful in creating these, because they kind of set the cabin on fire, right?
I couldn't tell if that was their plan, you know?
It felt like it was accidental, and then they were like, oh, oops.
And then they call the fire department.
Right.
They had a phone signal.
Right, exactly.
And like, this is the first phone call they made.
Right. And in any case, the cabin's burning down. They, like, find a little, I don't know, is it like a little tool cabin? Like a little shed?
Yeah, shed. It's a shed.
And it's full of and I can't believe they haven't been in this thing before. Like, it's basically full of every possible thing you would want. And obviously there's a chainsaw. Hi, Evil Dead. Involved, and they're basically like, okay, we're gonna take this and we're gonna get out, and they go on a crazy zombie hunting binge.
Yeah So they're basically bringing back the story that the Wanderer told them when they first started, that the Norwegians had risen up against the Nazis, fighting them with sledgehammers and shovels and blah 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 and scythes. So that's kind of, they outfit themselves with, some of them are old school weapons, and then there's the chainsaw, and Martin still has the shotgun, and they look all badass, and they get ready to fight some Nazi zombies.
And you know what they do? This montage is very well done. They crack some heads. There's a lot of that blood you were talking about. They're covered in the blood.
It's so covered.
Martin has gotten over his fear of the blood. And, this is a lot of zombies to be taken care of.
Yeah. And there's one really interesting little shot in this where Roy is, I think it's after the first wave, because he's using a sledgehammer for the first wave. In the second wave of zombies that are coming, he's holding a little hammer in one hand and a sickle in the other.
I saw that, yes.
And he like puts them in front of him and like the Soviet flag formation.
Right.
And I don't know if that was supposed to be like, it's communists versus Nazis. Like, they kind of hate each other. Is he a communist or I don't know.
Right. I thought it was weird too. They are, I have to say, with their just two people and the stuff that they have, they do a pretty good job at destroying that first wave. But then sadly they have to come to terms with the fact that the battle is not over. Because is it during this little second wave that Vergard shows up again?
It might be the second or the third, but yeah, Vergard shows up and unleashes the machine gun and shoots a wave of zombies down. Herzog shows up and sends his like elite bunch of zombies at them, and
obviously they know that Vergard is the one to take out because they all go for him.
But he gets some pretty cool snowmobile zombie kills in.
He does.
Like flattening them with a jump or putting their head under the tracks and then just holding down the gas. It's pretty nasty.
It is nasty, and he takes out a lot of them before they get him. And that's why it kind of bothers me how they get him, because I feel like Veergaard, out of all of them, wouldn't have let his guard down here. And somehow they sneak up upon him again.
Well, I think they're just coming out of the snow. Like, these damn Nazi zombies are just really good at just popping up right next to you.
I guess so, but it just felt a little too, well, whatever. But I don't want to say... It just didn't feel... I almost said it didn't feel realistic.
There you go.
Which I know is a ridiculous statement to make when discussing this film, but they basically, this little group of elite zombie assassins take down Vergard by first stabbing him through the chest with a sword or a knife, and then totally decapitating him within like 5 seconds. Every single piece of him.
Well, that's not decapitation, because that's just the head. It's quartering or whatever.
Sorry, quartering.
Because they take all of his limbs.
They take everything. And it's kind of sad because he was just reunited with Martin and Roy. He doesn't get to tell them all the cool stuff he's been doing in the meantime. And, in this second little wave of a battle, Martin ends up getting bitten. And they're still valiantly trying, and Martin, remembering Erland's advice, has his chainsaw and decides to do a self-amputation.
Yeah, and Roy is like, dude, what are you doing?
Actually, Roy's reactions here are they are incredible. Because Roy is just like totally aghast. Because not only does he amputate his own arm, but he also cauterizes it using some matches and, is it lighter fluid?
Yeah.
On the corpse
of a zombie.
And then, he thinks he's okay, and then out of the snow, one of those pesky snow zombies come, and they bite him in the dick.
This was like the funniest part of the film, basically, where right after he cauterizes the wound, Martin is basically like, he's like laughing. He's like, wasn't that crazy? And then zombie on his dick.
Right.
And
kills
that zombie. Kills that zombie, and then like he looks at the chainsaw, and Roy's just like, "No, man,
no." And then the final and last wave of zombies come, and man, is it a doozy! So Herzog is standing there looking all smug, and they're just popping out of the snow from all over the place.
Yeah, which I guess raises the question: how many of these Nazi zombies are there? Because they've killed probably 30. There were 300 of these Germans originally, but that was before the battle with the Norwegians in the 40s. So there shouldn't be that many.
You would think that this would have been his little elite squad or whatever, but apparently not.
Apparently he has unlimited Nazi zombies at his control, and they were all over the grounds around the cabin.
Right.
Because he's like, rise up! And they just all get up out of the snow.
And Martin and Roy, to their credit, just run like hell.
Yeah.
But then I feel, because Roy meets his end, but it's an end that I'm like, it's not fully clear that Herzog's hit him in the head with the hammer, but obviously that's what happened, because he starts holding his head. And then once again, those crazy trees. I mean, these trees should also have their own credit in this film because one of those trees disembowels him and his part of his intestine gets stuck to it and he can't run because he's stuck to the tree, or part of his intestines like connecting him to the tree. And obviously in a situation like this, he does what he has to do, which is to die. And Herzog immediately takes this opportunity to pick his pocket.
Yeah, which is how Martin finally realizes that it's the gold, and that's the source of the zombies. I don't know. That's what they're looking for, apparently,
Right.
because they all have this gold shit in their pockets. And once Martin sees the Herzog goes after it, he then turns around and runs back to the cabin, which is burnt down, finds the box of jewelry, and
just gives it to them and runs away.
Does he give it to them?
He kind of like points at it and then runs away, and they go and grab it and give it to Herzog.
Yeah.
And so you think Martin's okay, except for the fact that obviously he's been bitten in the Johnson and is half freezing and trying to get back to the car.
Yeah, the bitten argument, I don't know that there is any kind of transformation to this either, because they talk about this, Roy and Martin, when he's talking about like cutting off his arm and then cutting off his genitals. Roy's like, look, did you see what they've been doing to everybody they've caught? They just tear them apart. It's not like they're looking for reinforcements. They don't want, they're not going to turn people over. And we never saw Vergard exhibit any symptoms of illness after he got bitten on the neck. So
True. You're right. So maybe in this, it's just the Nazis are cursed. But in any case, Martin makes the long, cold journey back to the car, and he's obviously freezing, but he does make it. And as he's trying to kind of put the keys in the ignition, a gold coin that Hana had snuck into his pocket falls out.
Yeah.
And his last words, or word, was "fuck," yeah, as the car just gets broken into by Herzog, and that it just fades to black. But overall, what did you think about the film, Stuart?
I watched it, but I did not really enjoy it. Honestly, I don't like Evil Dead enough to want to see lots of those.
Right.
So, and that's what it was. And you know, as self-conscious as it was, whatever. I like seeing a little insight into Norwegian culture. I'm not sure that this really counts as that. But
I'd heard a lot about it, so maybe this is part of it, is that I didn't see it when it was starting to make waves, and I think that's in part, part of it colored my opinion of this when watching it. It was so hyped up that I don't exactly know what I expected, even though I knew the premise of it. And I'd agree with you. I think it was a little too self-conscious. I think it couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. And I also felt like, and I know this is sort of a silly argument, but if you're going to have a plot line that involves cursed Nazi zombies, you have to be a little bit more clear about where the heck they came from and why. I felt like there were a lot of plot holes, even more so than the usual horror film has. And it just bothered me. Like, I just don't, like, did Sarah put that box of jewels and gold into the basement?
I think that is the implication because of two things. Because they find her backpack in the snow outside the cabin after Vergard has already left. And he has that dream about her, which causes him to leave to look for her, where you see her going into that hatch, which is where the box is found. How she might have come across that box and why she would think, I need to put this in the freezer, who knows? But I think that those two things, the fact that her backpack was there, she had been, basically says she had been there before them, and the weird dream that Vergard had. Okay.
Well, I'll give you that. Maybe we are missing some of it due to the language. Maybe there are things that we didn't quite catch. But overall, it still was a little strange. And I did think the things that I liked about this film, I thought that some of the action scenes and the effects were very well done. And I thought overall the look of it, especially for $800,000, was pretty incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I just, it was hard to, I didn't really feel like, even though I know the characters were supposed to be kind of stereotypes, they didn't really None of them really stood out for me except for Vergard. The rest were kind of like, I don't know. I did like the Martin and Roy scenes a lot, but I didn't enjoy this film that much. It actually took me a little while to get through it. I had to sort of break it up a little bit.
Oh, wow. A harsh criticism from HA, everybody.
Which is not, no, for me, usually I can just watch something straight through and I have no problem with it. And this, I was kind of bored. So,
that's the problem with basically a remake, which is kind of what it is. It's just a remake in the snow in a foreign language.
Right. That's exactly what it is. So I think if you're into this kind of thing, it has some laughs and it is funny, but it's not, I guess it fell below my expectations. So, but I also enjoyed the insight into Norwegian culture.
If that's our biggest takeaway, and headbands.
And there you have it. That was Dead Snow, recapped by Reanimated in episode 20. Hope you enjoyed that. Stick around for more content from Reanimated coming up real soon. Thanks.